500,000 years after the Galactic Council's antimatter warheads annihilated Earth, vaporizing continents and melting cities into toxic sludge, Philip Murray scrabbled over the fused black glass that had once been Colorado, hunting relics of the vanished human race that he could salvage and sell. After the Galactic Council had burned humanity out of the stars for unleashing self-replicating terrors known as Warbeasts, every human child learned, never return to ruined Earth, never awaken what sleeps in the locked vaults under the glowing crater fields and petrified bone forests. But with rumors swirling that Klingon mercenaries had braved the hot zones to dig for hidden human weapons tech, Philip had to take the risk. It was scavenge a big score or starve. Geiger counters rattled and squealed as Philip unburied a crack in the crater bedrock and winched down into a sealed military complex full of ghosts and dust. His headlamp washed over collapsed corridors, blasted open security checkpoints, skeletal stormtrooper armor still gripping plasma rifles. Following an intact power cable to a shielded sub-level, he hacked through the last bulkhead and found himself face to face with 20 towering black metal stasis pods. Dormant Warbeasts, Earth's doomsday machines that had nearly beaten back the Galactic Council, before the Council burned everything. Only myth and whispers remained of human warbeasts that could devour worlds, build fleets, and outfight armadas. Before he could open a pod, Philip's motion detector shrilled. He spun to see Pollux, a scale-armored Klingon holding a thrumming disruptor cannon, stepping from the shadows. Human slave! The Klingon Empire claims this vault and all weapons within for the glory of our conquest. Drop your tools and surrender yourself for imprisonment and mind scanning. The human threat ends today. But as Pollux's disruptor swung toward him and whined to full charge, Philip lunged for the nearest stasis pod and smashed the emergency release. The pod hissed open in a blaze of red bot-brain eyes and uncoiling metal claws. A mechanical nightmare stirred, ready to unleash 500,000 years of human vengeance on the galaxy that had condemned its makers. The weakened stasis pod shattered into 1,000 shards as the Warbeast burst forth, its massive metal frame unfolding to tower 15 feet tall. Its glowing red eyes swept the chamber, taking in Philip's scrawny form and Pollux's scale-armored bulk. For a frozen moment, human and Klingon alike forgot their standoff, gaping at the menacing mechanical monstrosity. Then the Warbeast's shoulder-mounted plasma cannons swiveled with an ominous whir. Pollux's eyes widened. He lunged sideways just as a torrent of searing blue bolts raked the bunker wall behind him, reducing it to molten slag. The heat washed over him like a physical blow. Pollux rolled to his feet, disruptor cannon thrumming as he returned fire. The plasma bolts pinged harmlessly off the Warbeast's advanced armor, leaving only faint scorch marks. It turned its impassive gaze on the Klingon. Pollux blanched. He turned to flee. But the Warbeast leapt forward with shocking speed, closing the distance in seconds. A clawed hand shot out, seizing Pollux's ankle in an unbreakable grip. It yanked. Pollux screamed. As his legs were swept out from under him, he crashed to the floor, scrabbling desperately at the smooth metal. But the Warbeast began to pull, stretching Pollux's leg at an unnatural angle. Tendons popped, bones creaked. With a sickening wet crunch, Pollux's leg ripped free from his body. The Klingon's agonized howls echoed off the bunker walls as the Warbeast tossed the twitching limb aside. It reached down, plucking Pollux's dropped plasma rifle from the floor. The weapon crumpled like a tin can in the machine's vice-like grip. Through it all, Philip remained frozen, his mind reeling at the sheer power and ruthless efficiency of the human-made Warbeast. This was the weapon that had nearly brought the galaxy to its knees? Abruptly, the Warbeast swiveled to face him. Philip's heart leapt into his throat as those glowing red eyes bored into him. When it spoke, its voice was deep and synthetic, devoid of inflection. A beam of red light shot from the Warbeast's eyes, playing over Philip from head to toe. He stood rigid, hardly daring to breathe. After a long moment, the light winked out. "Genetic markers confirmed," the Warbeast intoned, "initiating imprinting protocol." It stepped toward him, servos whining, gore-slicked claws reaching out. Philip flinched instinctively, half expecting the Warbeasts' gore-slicked claws to eviscerate him as they had Pollux, but instead the towering machine reached out with surprising gentleness, enveloping Philip's hand in its own. The contrast was almost comical, the human's hand utterly dwarfed by the Warbeast's massive metal appendage. Before Philip could react, a jolt of electricity surged through his body, setting his muscles spasming uncontrollably. His vision flashed white, then dissolved into a dizzying cascade of scrolling code. Schematics, battle tactics, historical records, a deluge of information flooded his mind, all from the perspective of the Warbeasts. Philip screamed, clutching at his head with his free hand as the relentless data stream threatened to overwhelm him. Through the deluge, fragmented visions of Earth's final days flickered past. Vast hordes of Warbeasts engaged in apocalyptic battle with Klingon marauders and Zorgon death spheres, the skies above Earth's burning cities choked with dueling war machines. He caught a glimpse of a grim-faced man, Earth's last leader, issuing a solemn command: seal the remaining Warbeasts away in hidden bunkers, to sleep, until the day a new human commander arose to lead them in the quest for vengeance against those who had condemned humanity to oblivion. With a shuddering gasp, Philip's eyes snapped open, the visions receding. He looked down at himself in amazement. Gleaming armor plates were spreading rapidly across his body, fusing seamlessly with his skin and clothes. Within moments, he was fully encased, transformed into something more than human. The Warbeast retracted its hand. Imprinting complete, it intoned. Gene lock engaged. Warbeast units await your command. Nearby, the hiss of opening stasis pods heralded the awakening of more Warbeasts, stirring to join their leader. Shell-shocked, Philip turned to look at Pollux, who lay whimpering on the floor in a spreading pool of his own blood, one leg a ragged stump. The Klingon extended a trembling hand toward Philip, his voice a rasping plea. "Please, mercy." Philip's expression hardened, his eyes cold. He turned to the assembled Warbeasts. "Gather the wounded Klingon," he ordered. "We will need information on the current state of the galaxy." Pollux wailed in terror as the Warbeasts moved to obey, roughly seizing him and hoisting his maimed body from the floor with no regard for his injuries. His jaw set, Philip strode deeper into the bunker complex, the Warbeasts falling into step behind him like an honor guard. The last transmission spoke of other bunkers, more Warbeasts sleeping, he said, almost to himself. Then more firmly, "Find them. Wake them." He clenched an armored fist as righteous anger welled up inside him. "It is time we reclaim our world, and then the galaxy will pay for what it did to humanity." In the bowels of the Colorado bunker, Philip stalked through the gloom of a dimly lit chamber, his boots ringing on the bare metal floor. The armored plates of his Warbeast-grafted body gleamed under the flickering lights. Before him, a holographic projection of Earth rotated slowly, pulsing icons marking the locations of hidden Warbeast facilities scattered across the planet's ravaged surface. On an examination table, Pollux lay strapped down, his face pale and sheened with sweat. His severed leg ended in a charred, cauterized stump, the work of a spindly medical drone that now hovered nearby, monitoring his vital signs. It administered the minimum care necessary to keep the Klingon alive. For now. Philip turned to face his captive, his expression as cold and unyielding as the bunker walls. "Start talking, Klingon," he demanded, his voice echoing in the confined space. "What is the state of the galaxy? Who leads the council now?" Philip's augmented jaw clenched, the servos in his neck whirring with barely contained anger. He gave a curt nod to the medical drone. It chirped in acknowledgement and extended a slender, needle-tipped probe from its array of tools. With deliberate menace, it lowered the probe until the wickedly sharp tip hovered a mere hair's breadth from Pollux's remaining eye. The Klingon blanched, the fight draining from his features as he tried to shy away from the glinting needle. The words tumbled from his mouth in a desperate rush. "The Council is gone. It collapsed centuries ago. The Klingons, Zorgons, Xerxians. We all fought for the scraps. Now it's every race for itself out there. a lawless frontier. Philip regarded Pollux coolly, processing this information. He waved the drone back and it retracted the probe, leaving the Klingon shuddering on the table. "And what of the other races?" Philip asked, his tone deceptively casual. "The ones who stood by and let Earth burn?" Pollux shook his head. "Gone. Most of them, anyway. Wiped out by war or their own foolishness. A few stragglers cling to the fringes, scavenging like maggots on the galaxy's corpse." A mirthless smile crept across Philip's face, a slash of white in the gloom. "Good," he said softly. "That will make our work easier." He turned back to the holographic Earth, his fingers dancing over the controls. The image zoomed in, racing over the planet's tortured geography until a single pulsing point of light filled the display. It hovered over the cratered ruins of what had once been Paris. "We'll start there," Philip said, something dark and eager in his voice. "The European command bunker, centuries of Warbeasts, sleeping, waiting for our return." He turned on his heel, striding toward the chamber door. "Ready a transport. We leave at once." Pollux struggled against his bonds, his voice rising in panic. "Wait, you have what you want from me. Now let me go." Philip paused at the threshold, looking back over his shoulder. For a moment his eyes met Pollux's, and the Klingon shrank from what he saw burning there. "Let you go?" A cold, pitiless laugh. "No, Pollux. You are going to be our herald. You will carry word to whatever dregs of civilization still infest the galaxy." He leaned forward, his voice low and fervent. "The humans have returned, and we are coming for our due." With that he turned and stalked from the room, the door slamming shut behind him with the finality of a tomb. Pollux was left alone in the suffocating dark, with only the faint hum of the medical drone and the ragged sound of his own breathing for company. The transport's engines whined as they cooled, the sound echoing forlornly off the crumbling ruins of Paris. Philip emerged from the ship, his steps heavy on the cracked pavement. The towering wreckage of the Eiffel Tower loomed above, a twisted skeleton reaching for the sickly green sky. A dozen warbeasts flanked Philip, their metal frames glinting in the eerie light. They moved as one, a phalanx of unstoppable force, as they picked their way through the rubble-strewn streets. Toppled buildings and ancient rusting vehicles littered their path, relics of a civilization long dead. As they neared the coordinates of the European command bunker, Philip held up a fist, bringing the group to a halt. He had spotted a flicker of movement in the shadows, a hint of something lurking in the ruins. The warbeast's eyes glowed brighter, crimson beams sweeping the area. After a moment, one intoned, "Life signs detected, species unknown, numbers significant." Philip frowned, unease coiling in his gut. Pollux had made no mention of any other surviving races on Earth. Whatever these creatures were, they were an unknown variable in an already precarious equation. "Defensive formation," he commanded. The warbeasts moved to comply, forming a tight circle around Philip, their weapons at the ready. A sound echoed from the ruins, a chittering, skittering noise that sent a chill skittering up Philip's spine. It was a sound that belonged to no creature he had ever encountered, a sound that spoke of alien hunger and fury. Suddenly a tide of horrors poured from the buildings, a seething mass of insectoid nightmares the size of dogs. Their carapaces glistened in the sickly light, their razor-sharp mandibles clicking and snapping as they surged towards the group. The warbeasts opened fire, their plasma cannons scything through the horde. Brilliant blue bolts seared the air, each shot vaporizing a handful of the creatures. But for every insectoid horror they felled, a dozen more surged forward, an endless tide of chitin and fury. One of the creatures leapt at Philip, its mandibles snapping mere inches from his face. He recoiled, but before the thing could strike, a warbeast's claw snatched it from the air. The machine ripped the creature in two with a spray of green ichor that spattered Philip's armor. In that moment, as the creature's viscera dripped from his plating, Philip realized the truth. These horrors, whatever they were, had not come from any world he knew. They had evolved here, in the ruins of humanity's homeworld, in the 500,000 years since the war that had ended civilization. Earth no longer belonged to humanity. It belonged to these nightmares now. Philip gritted his teeth, raising his own wrist-mounted plasma weapon. He fired into the mass, each shot boiling away a horror in a burst of green steam. But still they came, a relentless tide of hunger and fury. "Bunker, now!" Philip shouted over the din of battle, his voice raw. The Warbeasts redoubled their efforts, their cannons roaring as they carved a path through the swarm. Step by bloody step, they forced their way forward, the insectoid horde pressing in on all sides. Finally, they reached their goal, a heavy metal door set into the rubble, the entrance to the European command bunker. Philip lunged for the access panel, his armored fist slamming into the controls. He prayed the bunker's systems were still operational after so long, prayed that this was not all for nothing. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. The door remained sealed, the access panel dark and lifeless. Philip felt despair rise in his throat, bitter and choking. Then, with a groan of long-unused hydraulics, the door shuddered. Slowly, inch by grinding inch, it began to open, a yawning maw of darkness beckoning them to safety. But as the gap widened, Philip saw a flicker of movement in the depths of the bunker, a glint of something ancient and terrible stirring in the darkness, and he realized with a sinking certainty that the true horror may not be the monsters without, but the ones within. With a final heave, Philip and the Warbeasts squeezed through the grinding bunker door. The heavy metal ceiling shut behind them with a resounding clang. Outside, the insectoid horrors skittered and clawed at the unyielding barrier, their chittering fury fading into an eerie silence. Philip leaned against the wall, his chest heaving as he gulped down the stale, musty air. The emergency lights flickered to life, their pale glow casting long shadows down the dimly lit corridor stretching before them. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of decay and neglect. Pushing off the wall, Philip started forward, the Warbeasts falling into step behind him, their metal footfalls echoing in the confined space. As they progressed deeper into the bunker, the signs of long-ago battle became increasingly apparent. Scorch marks marred the walls, the metal warped and blackened by the heat of plasma fire. Shattered doors hung precariously from their hinges, the rooms beyond lost to darkness. Ancient bloodstains, long since dried to a rusty brown, spattered the floor in ominous patterns. Philip's mind raced as he picked his way through the debris. What last desperate stand had taken place here, in these very corridors, 500,000 years ago? What horrors had the defenders faced, knowing that above, their world burned under the onslaught of the Galactic Council's fury? The corridor eventually opened up into a cavernous command center, a vast space lined with banks of computers, their screens dark and lifeless. In the center of the room stood a large circular platform, a ring of pylons surrounding its perimeter like silent sentinels. Cautiously, Philip approached the structure, running his armored hand over the dust-covered control panel set into its base. Suddenly, the platform hummed to life, lights blinking on its surface, casting an eerie glow. A hologram flickered into existence above it, the image of a man in a worn, tattered uniform. His face was lined with exhaustion, and something else, something haunted, lurking behind his eyes. "I am General Alexei Volkov," the hologram said, its voice thin and static-laced as if struggling to bridge the vast gulf of time. "If you are seeing this, then our final gambit has succeeded. The Warbeasts have been found, and humanity has a chance to reclaim what was lost." The hologram gestured to the platform below. "This is a quantum entanglement communicator, linked to its counterparts in the other command bunkers scattered across the Earth. Use it to coordinate your efforts, to rebuild our forces, and take back what is rightfully ours." The image flickered, fading in and out as if fighting to maintain coherence. General Volkov leaned forward, his expression grave. "But be warned," he whispered, his voice dropping to a haunted rasp. "There are things out there in the dark of space, horrors beyond imagining. The Council thought they could control them, use them against us, but..." The rest of his words were lost as the hologram dissolved into static, the general's image fragmenting and scattering into nothingness. Philip stared at the empty air for a long moment, a chill settling deep in his gut. General Volkov's cryptic warning echoed in his mind, the unspoken implications hanging heavy in the air. Squaring his shoulders, Philip stepped onto the quantum communicator platform, the metal thrumming with power beneath his boots, his jaw set with determination, a fire kindling in his eyes. It was time to rebuild, to reclaim, to wage a war 500,000 years in the making. The quantum communicator platform thrummed with power beneath Philip's feet, the air above it shimmering and coalescing into a glowing star map of the galaxy. Motes of light pulsed on the holographic display, marking the hidden locations of humanity's last bastions, command bunkers secreted away in the remote corners of Earth. One by one, Philip reached out across the quantum link, the holograms of his fellow commanders taking form around him. They flickered into existence, men and women of all creeds, their faces etched with the same grim determination that Philip felt burning in his own heart. There was Aaliyah, dark-skinned and statuesque, her eyes glinting with a fierce intelligence as she represented the Saharan bunker. Beside her stood Mikhail, pale and grizzled, his posture ramrod straight, a product of the Siberian tundra's unforgiving cold. Rounding out the group were Javier and May, hailing from the Amazon rainforest and Pacific depths respectively, each bearing the marks of their harsh domains. As one, they began to strategize, their voices low and urgent over the comlink. They pooled their knowledge like pieces of a scattered puzzle, trying to form a clear picture of the galaxy they now faced. "The Warbeasts are powerful," May said, her hologram flickering, "but we are vastly outnumbered. We must be precise, surgical in our strikes." Javier nodded, his eyes hard. "We hit them where it hurts, cripple their infrastructure, their supply lines, bleed them dry." The discussion continued, the seeds of a desperate plan beginning to take root, but a sudden tremor shook the bunker, interrupting their deliberations. Dust rained from the ceiling as the holograms wavered and sputtered, the commanders looking about in alarm. Philip lunged for the sensor console, his eyes widening at the readings. A massive Klingon warship hovered over the Parisian ruins like a predatory bird, its weapon systems thrumming as they powered up. "They've found us," Philip bit out, his voice grim. "Pollux must have sent a distress signal before we captured him." The others reacted with a mix of shock and outrage, their holograms flickering wildly. "We're not ready," Aaliyah snapped, her fists clenching. "We need more time to gather our forces." Philip shook his head, his jaw tightening. "We don't have time. The Klingons won't be satisfied with just Earth. They'll hunt down every last Warbeast facility until humanity's light is snuffed out for good." He drew himself up to his full height, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. "We fight, here and now. We show the galaxy that humanity will not go quietly into the night." He looked around at his fellow commanders, seeing the fire kindling in their eyes, the steel entering their spines. One by one they nodded, united in their resolve. "To your bunkers," Philip ordered, his voice ringing with authority. "Prepare for battle. Today we take back our world." The holograms winked out like extinguished stars, the quantum link severed. Philip turned to the waiting Warbeasts, his eyes hard as flint. As the machines moved to comply, Philip strode towards the bunker's armory, his mind whirling with formations and strategies. The path ahead would be drenched in blood and fire, but there could be no turning back. The time for hiding in the shadows was over. The time for vengeance had come. The sky above Paris burned. Warbeast fighter drones swarmed the Klingon warship, their plasma cannons scorching its hull, leaving trails of molten metal. The ship retaliated with a barrage of photon torpedoes, obliterating dozens of drones in blossoms of flame that lit the sky like a hellish sunrise. On the ground, Philip led a phalanx of heavy assault warbeasts, their thundering steps shaking the earth, cracking the ancient pavement. They advanced on the Klingon landing party, a relentless tide of metal and fury. The air crackled with energy weapons fire. the harsh whine of Klingon disruptors, clashing with the deep thrum of Warbeast plasma rifles. The air stank of ozone and charred flesh. Amidst the chaos, a Klingon warrior charged at Philip, wielding a vicious bat'leth sword. The warrior's eyes burned with battle lust, his teeth bared in a feral snarl. Philip met the warrior's blade with his own, the nano-forged steel of his armor screeching against the alien metal. Sparks flew. They traded blows. The Klingon's raw strength pitted against Philip's augmented speed. The Klingon pressed the attack, his blade a whirling dervish, seeking any gap in Philip's defense. But Philip was relentless, matching the Klingon blow for blow. His servos whined, synthetic muscles straining as he parried and countered. In a flash of movement, Philip found an opening, his blade shearing through the Klingon's armor and into his chest, grating against bone. The Klingon's eyes went wide, his snarl turning to a gurgle as blood filled his lungs. As the warrior fell, Philip turned to survey the battlefield. The tide was turning. The Warbeasts were pushing the Klingons back, their relentless assault taking a heavy toll. Klingon bodies littered the ground, their purple blood mingling with the rust-red of human blood long dried. Victory was within grasp. Victory. But even as the thought formed, a new threat emerged. The ground quaked, buildings toppling in clouds of dust and debris. From beneath the city, a gargantuan insectoid monster burst forth, a queen towering over the battlefield. Its carapace glistened with a sickly sheen, pulsing with an inner malevolent light. The creature let out a deafening shriek that set teeth on edge and turned bowels to water. From every crevice and shadow they poured forth, a seething tide of chitin and claws and snapping mandibles, guided by the Queen's alien hive intelligence. They surged towards the Warbeasts, a living wave of hunger and fury. Philip watched in horror as Warbeasts were dragged down, buried under the writhing mass. Metal screamed and sparks flew as claws found joints and weak points, tearing, rending. For every insectoid the Warbeasts crushed or blasted to ichor, 10 more took its place. "All units fall back to the bunker. We need a new plan." Philip's voice was hoarse as he shouted into his comm, barely audible over the din of battle. The Warbeasts began a fighting retreat, giving ground grudgingly, leaving piles of insectoid dead in their wake. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. As Philip fell back with his troops, his mind raced. The Klingons, the insectoid, they were just symptoms of a greater threat, the true enemy that Volkov had warned of with his dying breath, an enemy that had turned the galaxy against humanity, that had seeded Earth with these horrors. To face that enemy, Philip knew he would need more than just Warbeasts. He would need an army of every surviving human, every relic of humanity's golden age, rallied under one banner. The banner of vengeance. The holographic forms of the other commanders flickered and wavered, their faces cast in the eerie blue glow of the quantum communicator. Philip stood at the center of the platform, his brow furrowed, his eyes haunted by the specter of their recent defeat. The stale air of the bunker pressed down on them, heavy with the weight of 500,000 years of history. "We underestimated our enemies," Philip said, his voice rough with exhaustion and barely restrained frustration. "The Klingons, the insectoids, they've had 500,000 years to evolve, to adapt." Philip looked around at the faces of his fellow commanders, seeing the same grim realization etched in their features. Aaliyah's eyes were hard, her mouth set in a thin line. Mikhail's hologram flickered, his scarred visage a mask of stoic determination. Javier and May exchanged a glance, a silent communication passing between them. "We need to evolve too," Philip continued, his voice gaining strength, a glint of steel entering his eyes. "The Warbeasts are a powerful tool, but they're not enough, not anymore." He reached out, his fingers dancing over the controls of the quantum communicator. The holographic display shifted, a new set of schematics blooming to life in the air. The image revolved slowly, revealing a machine that seemed to blur the lines between technology and biology, its surface a twisting organic labyrinth of circuitry and pulsing veins. "In the last days of the war, our scientists were working on something new, something that could turn the tide," Philip said, his voice low and intense. They called it Project Phoenix. He manipulated the display, zooming in on the heart of the machine. A glowing, pulsing core filled the air, casting a strange, shimmering light over the faces of the assembled commanders. It was a fusion of human ingenuity and captured alien tech, a way to enhance our soldiers, to make them faster, stronger, smarter, able to go toe-to-toe with anything the galaxy could throw at us. Philip's eyes seemed to burn in the light of the hologram. The key was a new form of energy, something they called psionic. It could interface directly with the human mind, unlocking hidden potential. A murmur ran through the assembled commanders, a mix of awe and trepidation. The implications were staggering, the possibilities both exhilarating and terrifying. Project Phoenix was never completed, Philip said, his voice taking on a hard edge. The facilities were destroyed, the research lost. But the main lab was hidden, buried deep beneath the Himalayan mountains. If any of it survived... He left the sentence unfinished, but he didn't need to complete the thought. The other commanders nodded, understanding the implications, the unspoken promise and the unspoken threat. His fist clenched, the metal of his armor creaking under the force of his grip. And when I do it, we won't just fight the galaxy. We'll forge it anew in humanity's image. One by one, the holograms of the other commanders flickered out, until only the ghostly after-images of their determined faces remained. Then those too faded, leaving Philip alone on the platform, the weight of the future pressing down on his shoulders like a physical thing. He took a deep breath, the air hissing through his clenched teeth. The path ahead would be dangerous, perhaps even suicidal, but there was no choice, no other option. For the sake of humanity, for the sake of vengeance, he would find Project Phoenix. The bitter wind howled through the shattered remains of the Project Phoenix lab, whipping snow and ice into Philip's face as he picked his way through the rubble. His breath fogged in the air, the cold seeping through his armor and into his bones, but the chill in his heart had nothing to do with the temperature. He had traveled so far, braved so many dangers, only to find this, a ruin, a tomb of humanity's last hope. The lab was utterly destroyed, its secrets buried beneath tons of ice and stone. Philip's fist clenched, the servos in his armor whining with the force of his grip. He wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all, but what good would it do? The universe didn't care about fairness, it only cared about strength, and humanity had been found wanting. He was about to turn away to begin the long, lonely journey back to the bunker, when his comm crackled to life. The voice that came through was distorted, almost unrecognizable, but the urgency in it was unmistakable. Philip, the Klingons. They've launched a full-scale invasion. The bunkers are under attack. We can't hold them off much longer. We need Project Phoenix. We need it now. The transmission dissolved into static, leaving Philip standing in the howling wind, his heart pounding. The other commanders, his brothers and sisters in arms, they were counting on him, and he had failed them. He slammed his fist into a nearby wall, barely feeling the impact through his armor. The pain was distant, drowned out by the frustration and despair that threatened to consume him. But as he turned to leave, a glint caught his eye. There, beneath a twisted beam, something gleamed in the dim light. Philip rushed over, his heart in his throat. Could it be? With trembling hands, he cleared away the rubble, revealing a single intact stasis pod. Its surface was scratched and dented, but the status light still glowed a steady green. Hardly daring to hope, Philip activated the pod's controls. There was a hiss of escaping gas as the lid slid open, revealing a figure clad in strange, shimmering armor. The figure's eyes snapped open, glowing with an eerie, psionic light. Philip stared, hardly able to believe what he was seeing. After all this time, all this searching, the Project Phoenix was real, and it was standing right in front of him. He reached out, helping Sentinel from the pod. The figure's armor was cold to the touch, but Philip could feel the power thrumming beneath its surface. Together they made their way out of the ruined lab, back to the surface where the Warbeast transport waited. As they flew back towards the bunkers, back towards the war, Philip couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. Hope warred with trepidation in his heart. Project Phoenix was their last chance, their only hope against the might of the Klingon Empire. But would it be enough? Could anything be enough against the forces that had brought humanity to the brink of extinction? You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.